Yeah, yes, I can, and I hope you can hear me. I'm having trouble streaming the internet connection keeps on going out, but I'll listen on the phone. Okay. Okay.
All right.
Maureen, you better be standing. To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My mind was.
Can I have a movement? Will someone move to approve the agenda? So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All against? All right, we have approved the agenda. So let's start with, are there any board announcements? Interpreter, please.
Good evening, Superintendent, board members, audience. My name is Alma Bejar. I will be doing the translation services in Spanish today. Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Alma Bejar y voy a hacer las traducciones en español. Si gustan mi asistencia, voy a estar hacia atrás. Gracias.
Gracias. Next is superintendent announcements.
Madam President, members of the board, I have no announcements other than I attended the opening session of the legislature today.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone here for public forum?
Madam President, no one has signed up for public forum this evening.
Thank you very much. Next, we have board update and follow-up. Is there any update from the board? Yes. Secretary Noble.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to update on some concerns I have heard in the community about the Turquoise Trail vote to terminate the lease, and there seems to be some confusion that that the intent of the board is to have Turquoise Trail as a public school within the district, and I just thought that was worth clarifying in this arena.
How did you want it clarified?
I just did so.
Okay.
Well, I need to clarify though, is the, it was that school, that building was Turquoise Trail, right? And then it became a charter, so we'll, I guess, just for my follow-up and what we need to do, I'm not real clear, will that become a name of a new school?
No, as a matter of procedure, this should be talked about during board discussion, and then it should be placed on the next
agenda, right.
Because it's
more substantive.
Yeah.
So maybe we actually need maybe a Turquoise Trail board update follow-up or my update follow-up, because I have some questions too that I need some direction. So maybe we could just have it as a discussion item or something.
Okay. In the next meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Any other board update or follow-up? Okay, let's move on to the superintendent update and follow-up.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't have anything at this time.
Okay. So that moves us to presentations, and the first one is the SB 9 mill levy election.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. At this point, I am going to turn this presentation over. Our lead will be Carl Grindler, Christy Yonda Wagner, and Dr. Ryan. I will be filling in here and there, as I usually do. So we'll go ahead and begin.
Thank you, Superintendent. Madam President, members of the board. This is a presentation which in large part we gave at the community partners breakfast last Wednesday morning, of which 4 of you were in attendance. So what I would propose is to move through this judiciously and maybe spend a few extra moments on areas that we didn't spend much time on at the community partners breakfast, or deserve some additional attention on clarifying SB 9 with ETN, and then also on the campaign and the election part. So this is what we're going to cover. An overview of SB 9 funding, the critical importance of it primarily for the public that may be watching. School funding 101 and where SB 9 fits. This seemed to resonate pretty well at the community partners breakfast as a way to orient themselves in school funding and how important SB 9 was. Then the difference between SB 9 and ETN, which is a question which is a good one and will come up, is coming up in this election, and certainly will come up in the ETN election next year. A little bit about the local election cycle, some summary of SB 9 by the members, and a little bit about the campaign. So this is a summary that we all came up with that could be an elevator speech if asked. Certainly it's an overview summary, but it includes some of the critical components of SB 9, primarily that it is locally funded, and its primary uses are facilities and maintenance, security systems, equipment, and infrastructure. And those all together help the district operate effectively and keep our schools safe and wholesome environments for student learning. And this is a continuation of the critical support of the SB 9 election as it is wrapping up its 6-year period of time in 2018.
Board Member Creel?
I was going to say that if that's, hello, there we go. If that's an elevator speech, it better be a skyscraper.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, yeah, you're right. Okay.
It's all good.
Keep on going.
But it'd take 30 seconds.
I wanted to say that the other day in the meeting, but it would just wasn't appropriate.
Okay. All right, School Funding 101. This is represented the 3 major fund categories: the general fund, the special revenue funds, and the capital funds. So it just orients us on where our money comes from and what it's for. And of course, SB 9 falls in the capital funds, which we'll spend more time talking about. As general information and helping anyone who is interested ground themselves a bit in more detail on the different funding sources which fall into those 3 major funds, these are the sub-fund categories and the amounts and the percentage of the total funding for our 2017-2018 budget of approximately $185 million. You can see there that SB 9 is $11.5 million, or about 6.2% of our total funding for the year. And then our capital funds, there are 4 of them: the GO Bond, SB 9, HB 33, and ETN. And you can see those amounts and percentages. And this is the uses. And so when you look at GO Bond, this is for school construction and major repairs and replacements and upgrades, and for energy projects. SB 9 is ongoing repairs and maintenance, as well as district-wide infrastructure and systems. HB 33, ongoing repairs and maintenance staff, and ETN, in-school tech and digital resources. So you see some overlapping of funds. Several have asked that question and gotten that clarification. There's an overlap between SB 9 and HB 33 on ongoing repairs and maintenance, and there's an overlap in SB 9 and ETN on different types of technology, which we'll clarify here in a moment. So we'd like to refer to the capital funding as Santa Fe for Santa Fe. All of these funds are local. And the capital funds are spent with local businesses wherever possible. And so in northern New Mexico, approximately 2/3 of the funding for SB 9 is spent here with contractors. And there's just some things that we can't buy in New Mexico, such as equipment and so forth. All right, for SB 9 expenditures, we've been asked to provide a little bit more detail on what we spend them on, and we track them in 3 general categories. These are arbitrary, but these follow along with the question that'll be on the ballot, and also the statute for the uses of SB 9. So facilities, repairs, and maintenance, and you can see those subcategories there: building and grounds, security and fire, playgrounds, athletic fields is just some of them. IT systems, equipment, and software. This is all district level, what we use it for. District network equipment, internet and telecommunications, enterprise software and license fees and support contracts. And then we have another category which picks up a significant amount of...
Carl, before you move on, do you want to define enterprise software?
Sure. Dr.
Enterprise software, if the district is an enterprise. The district as an enterprise would be those things like student information system or our vision, which are financial systems. So they're enterprise-wide systems that are used to make
And then that third category, which is mostly school support programs, but there's some department support there as well. All right, so now Dr. Ryan's going to spend a bit of time on these next two slides, highlighting and then detailing a bit more the difference between SB 9 and ETN.
Given Mr. Trio's comments, SB 9 funds are for those systems that have to happen regardless of whether we want them to happen or not. Student information system, finance system, the internet to the schools, and the devices that secretaries and us use. So they're to operate the district, and they have to happen. ETN funds are specific to teaching and learning, so they pay for the Chromebooks for teachers. It pays for software for math or science, which wouldn't be enterprise, it would be specific to a content area. It pays for our digital learning coaches, and so those things that are focused specifically on enhancing a teaching and learning environment as opposed to the enterprise of the school system.
And then you can see a bit more detail on this slide. This just documents a lot of what Dr. Ryan just went through, but just in a bit more detail. And it gives an indication that, you know, out of the SB 9 funding, approximately $3.4 million is budgeted out of the $11.5 we've received to be able to support those district-wide infrastructure and systems components. And of course, ETN, all of what we receive for ETN, our portion less the, you know, the charter distribution, is for in-school tech and digital resources. This slide just highlights the local election cycle and the fact that we have 4 different bonds which the public votes on, plus board elections every 2 years. You need a chart like this to keep track of what's taking place. And so it was 6 years ago that we brought SB 9 before the public, 3 years ago that we brought HB 33 before the public. ETN was 2 years ago, and the GO bond a year ago. And you'll see that ETN is coming next year, because the ETN that we took before the public in 2016 was a 3-year vote. And so that comes up next year. SB 9 by the numbers, you can go through these, but what we're working to do here is provide an easy way to be able to understand some of the major parts of SB 9. What the mill levy is, the number of years, the number of schools, district and 6 local charter schools. Approximately 13 million is generated, 12% which is shared with the charters.
Just 1 second. Could you check, see if she's gone? Okay.
Yeah. I can call her back.
President Price, want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Over 14,000 district and charter school employees, 28 district and 6 charter schools, over 60 buildings in the district on 35 separate campuses. Of course, this came up during the community partners discussion of the $200 per year is the SB 9 property tax assessment for a taxpayer with a $300,000 market value home. The taxable value is 1/3 of the market value, and then the percentage, the 2% percentage.
Is the square footage still on there? Or is that on another slide?
It's coming up. I think it's coming up. There it is.
There it is.
Over 400 million in public school and facility assets are maintained from SB 9, which is a huge number. Lots of facilities, tons of square footage. We can see 2.7 million, you know, funded by
Can she mute it on her
the
side?
11.5 or so
we can
million
mute it on
that are
our
received
side.
by the district.
Back to that previous slide, I think it's an important talking point when we think of over 60 buildings. on 35 campuses, 2.7 million square feet. You know, it takes a lot to maintain an 1,800 square foot home, right? And you think about all of the HVAC or what, you know, boilers or windows or door jams or all
Roofs.
the things, roofs, you know, all the things that go wrong or that have to be maintained. And when you think of the size of the budget that we get for this, it really is extraordinary that we maintain that level of, you know, what we do for our schools and what we need to do. And so I really like this slide. If, you know, people are educating, you know, community groups, or you have opportunities to talk to people, I would star this page for yourselves. I think it's really very informative.
All right, moving on.
Yes.
She doesn't really need to be here until we do the media thing, because Maureen and I saw this. I mean, if she wants, because whatever the interference is.
Tried to get her attention.
She's trying to call her.
Hello?
If she would just mute it on her side, it would fix
I
it.
just sent her a text. So that.
Or turn down the volume. Oh, but then she can't hear us. Never mind.
All right, on the election.
She doesn't get texts. She doesn't look at texts.
Absentee voting is underway, and the early voting
Is
will
there a
start.
reason? Is there a reason why it didn't start here today?
What?
It did.
It did.
Oh, it did?
It's in the conference room.
There's a big flag.
It
I
started
got
at
here
6.
early to do that, and okay, the door was closed, so I thought okay.
Actually, it's scheduled to start tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow. I
No,
thought
it
started
wasn't.
today. No,
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't
that's
here
correct.
today.
but
Absentee,
they've moved in. I guess I didn't realize that it hadn't started yet.
Okay.
I will be the first one in line tomorrow to vote, 8 a.m.
I got here early to do it, to early vote.
Well, we had requested in our proclamation the 12th, for
Okay.
early voting to start, but it's fine that it starts tomorrow, so that's when it is. And it goes through February 3rd. And then there's the 5 locations which are listed there. And then, of course, the 15 consolidated precinct voting convenience centers, that'll be open from 8 a.m. to 7:30, I believe, on that evening. And if you're a registered voter, you can vote in any one of those precincts. And so the reason why we have early voting and the reason why we've done the voting convenience centers is to make it as easy and accessible to the public as we possibly can for them to have the opportunity to vote. And of course, the community college has an item on the election as well, and we're splitting the costs of the election. All right, the next one is the marketing campaign. Ms. Yonda Wagner, do you want to pick this one up?
Board President Price, members of the board, and Superintendent, we're a couple of weeks in, I guess, to our marketing campaign. We start back planning and doing some initial work in October, November, December, but now you'll see the real activity, probably seen the road signs, some of them, and banners around our schools, around the community. We've been doing community presentations. I know several people at this table came to the community breakfast last Wednesday morning that was well attended and received by our community partners. We're doing this presentation here this evening. Dr. Garcia and any guests that are invited will talk about SB 9 at upcoming radio and TV shows this month. We'll be doing submissions to the New Mexican. We are putting the banners back up on our buses again, and we'll get our marquee messaging and parent messaging out to the school communities, so there'll be information for them to share in their newsletters. We do limited print advertising at this point in time, and we are going to add some radio spots, I think, on K-Suave that we're looking at initiating in the next week or so.
Is the video on the next slide, or does it talk about the video? We have a video in English and Spanish that we created. I think you saw the English version, and then we just recently taped the Spanish version. And it's available on the website as well. And we're sending that link to community groups if they want to use it with their groups.
Okay. Are there any questions? Board Member Garcia?
Carl, thank you for the presentation. I have a question on slide 10. Looks like the annual budget for that is $11.5 million, and 3.4 of that has already been budgeted for. Where's the remaining 8.1 at?
Madam President, Member Garcia. Madam President, Member Garcia, this slide, and that portion of the slide refers to the 11.5, of course, is the total amount we receive approximately each year from SB 9 proceeds from the county. And when we budget this, we budget approximately $3.4 million for the district-wide infrastructure and systems portion of those responsibilities. And then, of course, on the previous slide, slide number 8, you'll see the 3 major categories. So the remainder of those funds are in the facilities repairs and maintenance, and some of it is in school department program improvements and support.
Thank you. And then also in regards to, I just want to make sure that the the electorate out there actually realizes that this isn't actually increasing any property taxes, correct?
That's correct.
Could you say that again?
Steve, you could actually.
So this does not increase property taxes 1 cent, is that correct?
President Price, Member Carrillo, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Also a question on slide 15 in regard to the marketing campaign. I know we actually are using KSWV, which is Keswabe, which is excellent. Are we looking at any additional local radio stations?
Board President Price, Board Member Garcia, we will have several radio appearances. I don't have Dr. Garcia's schedule with me this evening, but I know that she works with several channels and as well as the city TV and maybe the community college. We can get those to you. And we also do a fair amount of social media. I forgot to mention that. And so we take bits of the video and pieces of information and push them out through social media throughout the campaign as well. So we understand that people have different forums for accessing information.
We also, for example, submitted to like the senior scene is an example. Little blurb and it's on.
You just have to pull it, it's a direction.
The senior scene, there's a piece in there. But in terms of actual ads, we've got to look at the budget. We did receive one proposal, and I don't believe that we put it out, broadly, but I think, it's something we could look at.
Thank you. Chris, you don't need to get that information to me. I'll just kind of.
Last year, this is a very similar campaign, and the voter turnout was very high, although we had a board election as well. And that may have influenced it some, but so we'll see what it looks like for this year.
And then just also one other thing is I actually voted, and there's been like 32 people that have voted since last week. So if anybody out there in the audience, obviously everybody has friends, cousins, neighbors, so if you can please tell everybody out there to get out there and vote, because this does help out our schools, that'd be great.
Your sisters and your cousins and your aunts. That was just from Pirates of Penzance. All right, moving on to the next presentation. Chaparral Elementary, E.J. Martinez Elementary, Nava Elementary follow-up.
On SB 9?
No.
Okay.
And discussion.
Thank you. Madam President, members of the board. So, as you well know, how could we forget, last spring when we were looking at, well, actually it started late winter with budgetary issues, and at the time we were looking at various cost-saving measures, looking at these schools based on the information that we had, was something that was brought to the board. Subsequently, as you will see in this presentation, these schools were discussed in the facilities master plan, and then in a subsequent presentation in, I believe, December. There was some discussion about this in October and possibly in November, and it was brought up again, I can't remember when, that the board asked us if we could talk about, all right, we don't have our back up against the wall right now with a budget where we have to make a decision about these schools, in 3 months or 6 months. But there's certain conditions that have stayed the same that warrant us to have a follow-up discussion and get some direction from the board how you would like us to proceed. So with that, our Chief Operations Officer, Ms. Wagner, will be going over this presentation with you, doing a little bit of contextual review, not only for you, but also for the audience or people that may want to look at this presentation later on that would have an interest as to why we're even having this discussion. I think sometimes memories are short. So with that said.
Thank you, Superintendent. Board President Price, members of the board. Most of the information that we'll share with you this evening, and I'll have Mr. Romero assisting for some sections, is really familiar to us because it's a part of our facility master plan, which is a 5-year plan. And we did all of the work building up to that plan in 2016, had it approved at the end of that year, and we're now in the implementation phases. So much of this information is familiar. We're just looking at it, I think, in a different frame and maybe not with as much urgency as we have at other time periods. So there were several issues identified in the facilities master plan. And as you know, we're required to submit a facility master plan. We're required to update it even during the cycle. So just because we did the facilities master plan in 2016 doesn't mean that we're not continuously updating the information. But the information that we are paying attention to in this particular presentation all came from the facilities master plan. And there were recommended issues of consideration or study for the school district, and we brought them forward before. But our district enrollment is projected to remain relatively flat. It's declining in some areas of town, and it's increasing in others, mostly in the south and southwest parts of town, which you'll see in future slides. Our populations have really shifted, and our facilities that are aging are in the center of town, so they're not really where our students are shifting to and where affordable housing is or multifamily houses are. Schools in the center of town are experiencing a decrease in enrollment and have excess capacity. And we've been saying that, I think for a couple of years now. We looked at excess seats in the spring, but we have updated enrollment information for this year that will show really what that looks like. As Dr. Garcia mentioned, we did a presentation in November of 2016 to get this facility master plan approved, or maybe I'm the one that mentioned that. Then the Public Schools Facility Authority approved the plan in 2016, and every time we make a change, we bring those changes typically to the Board of Education. We submit changes to PSFA, the Public Schools Facility Authority, and they update the document throughout the course of its life. So from 17 to 2021, it's a very live document. We're making updates and informing the state of those changes throughout the course of the implementation. In April, as a part of the Finance Subcommittee study sessions, this became a particularly hot topic, and it was with a fair amount of urgency that we brought forward the data from the master plan around Chaparral, Nava, and EJ Martinez in particular. We presented many aspects of tonight's presentation with last year's enrollment data in April of 2017. In December, we asked our team from Architectural Research Consultants, ARC, they're our contracted provider of assistance to develop our facilities master plan. We asked them to come and provide information on district enrollment and capacity. And we were focusing on options that evening around Turquoise Trail. But some of the information provided, much of the information provided about enrollment trends, housing starts, jobs is relevant to any discussion we have about our public schools. And so we'll review some of the information from December again this evening. I'm going to ask Mr. Romero to go over these slides on the district enrollment factors. And just to put it into context, this is work done by our demographers with ARC, and they did present most of this information to you in December. So we'll be going through this relatively quickly, but we just want to, again, put a frame around the discussion, again, with good information for you to consider.
Thank you, President Price and board members, Superintendent. As you know, the ARC takes into our contracted demographers take into account a number of different factors when they're estimating district enrollment projections. And that question always seems to come up about what factors are they taking into account. And we'll run through these real quickly. But we looked at enrollment increases for a period of time from about the early 2007 to 14, but then we're kind of leveling off as we get towards this last school year. Also, we had a number of district charter schools left to become state charter schools, and the pre-K program enrollment leveled off over the last 3 years, so no new students coming into the system. Again, housing starts was kind of the same trend, and early on there were a lot of housing starts, but that's leveled off and there hasn't been a lot of recovery over the last few years. There is some growth expected in the Los Saleras area and in the southwestern end of the town. You see that growth described there. Again, same trend with the county births. We had a large increase near the beginning of the 2000s, but again, that started to stabilize and level off as we get into 2015. A couple other, I guess, points is that residents living in Santa Fe grew by about almost 13,000 persons from 2000 to 2010, but again, things have leveled off. Employment trends looks about the same pattern, where we have that large growth early on in the 2000s, and then with the economic downturn, we're still recovering from that. But however, I guess there are a few recent startup businesses that are expanding and have some potential to grow, so we have to look at that also. So with all those factors that they take into account, what they're looking at is this mid-range is the most likely, and we'll look at a chart here in just a second that explains what this mid-range projection looks like. The mid-range average is only about 0.1% over the next 10 years. There are some high-range averages and low-range averages, but typically the mid-range seems pretty consistent with the previous projections that we've done. So looking at the mid-range average, it's the black line you'll see right in the middle going from 2017 on forward to 2027. And you'll see a leveling out of the student enrollment. That's our projection. Taking into account those birth rates decline slightly, housing starts pick up, pre-K stabilizes, and similar capture rates. And this would be by school level. So you'll see elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and other school programs. But this next slide is kind of the most telling when you talk about demographics. So you look at the very top, it is the south side schools. It is kind of bluish on the chart, but if you look on the left side, you'll see what the south side schools are described. And you'll see that large growth towards the south is the projection. The other schools, the South Central, downtown, out towards El Dorado especially, and the far north schools are kind of flatlining and stabilizing during that time period. But the large growth is predicted or projected to be in the south schools.
Go back to that one.
So it would seem from this slide that we're not necessarily projecting that much more growth relative to what we've had to deal with these previous 5 years. I mean, that's what really, I think, threw us into a tailspin, and we built the new schools out there. But I mean, it really only looks like, let's say that's 100 to 400, maybe 300 more kids out there. And I know that's super significant, but when you look at the chart and you see that big spike before 16, 17, one can take a look really just quickly and say, holy smokes, what are we going to do? So we're not in that kind of situation. We're just in a what are we going to do situation, not a holy smokes
I think
situation.
the only thing where there is a little bit of debate, if there is debate, because, it's just really shifts in demographics, not really huge growth, is the Amy Beale area. And we do talk about it a little bit in the presentation that was done in December about Las Saleras and those areas. However, and a lot of this is anecdotal, but some of it's also just eyeballing, if you go in that community, there appears to be a sudden burst of growth that I don't know if the demographers necessarily picked up or not. I don't know. I don't know what their methodology is. I got to trust that they're working with the builders, or that they collect information from permits. I don't know how they go about doing it, but I know, and I don't know, Ms. Cashman is on, if she can hear me or not, but that's been her concern, that it appears that there's just been a surge in building that seems to be accelerated. That was, but she's concerned whether or not that was really picked up by the demographers.
Who speaks? Do you
want?
Yeah. One quick question. Do you know the answer to this question? Do you speak to the demographers?
I do, and, the growth in enrollment projections are a comprehensive effort between the demographers, our city planning staff. They're looking at developers and permits. The difficult part is, so you can look at a development, and there's actually a slide in the December 2017 presentation that showed by development the predicted number of students per house or per houses. I don't have it in front of me tonight. But what they're doing is they're making some assumptions about the price range of the houses being sold and the number of families with children that might assume those houses or purchase houses in those areas. And so it's, of course, not exact, but what we've found has been accurate from our demographers is that projection of the flat line and the shift in where kids are. And so while Mr. Creo is correct in that it's not as if we need, new schools tomorrow, we have a continued issue on our hands, and that is we don't have more students. Where students are living and accessing housing is in a part of town where we don't have excess seats, and we're losing students in the center of town. So there's all these things sort of happening at the same time, and how quickly these housing starts and housing developments might affect Amy Beale and Pinon and Nino Otero, we can't quite predict, but they're definitely going to continue to strain the area. There's no doubt about that. And that's why we brought the Turquoise Trail issue forward with our demographers in December and said we do have an issue on our hands if we don't attain another property in that area. So that I think is a future consideration for the board when you go into the discussion about what next for that property on Highway 14.
Just also on that note, with the demographers, whenever they took this, I had to question them whenever they came to in front of the Citizens Review Committee, because I hope that and I have the same concerns that the all board members should, and hopefully we do, is just the growth in the south side. There's an apartment complex off the South Meadows, which is a 450-unit apartment complex. As Christy mentioned, there's these new subdivisions that are coming into Las Saleras, such as saying this price range is based off of that these people that are affording these homes aren't going to have children. But we also have to take into consideration that whenever you build a 200 or 300 lot subdivision, some of those houses, I think it's 12 or 13%, have to actually be affordable housing. So so it's not just these expensive houses, affordable housing component within these subdivisions. Today I was in the zoning department at the county where what's the subdivision there at Richards and I-25 there that we've been talking about?
Oshara?
Yes, Oshara. Actually, Oshara was going forward to the county commission to get rid of their commercial development and increase their lot size to 482 lots. So I don't know that the individuals that were taking this study took all that into account. There's just, I think us as a school board just need to really look at this growth and see how it's going to affect our schools. So just saying that for the record.
I would suggest as we, move through this, we'll note that, and possibly, Christy, we may want to bring back ARC to maybe answer some of those questions. Another issue that was brought up to me that I'm not aware of, and I don't know if I'm going to speak to it correctly, you probably know better than I, around, there's some lots, I guess, that you can have, you're allowed to have like 2 homes, or you can build, I guess, so that family can buy property and put 2 dwellings on it. And it's kind of little nuances for the city, but do you know if the demographers were aware of those sorts of things?
I believe that, they work directly with our city staff, and they're looking at permits and how people are subdividing lots. So that is where they're coming up with these calculations. But in our most recent meeting with the city planning staff, it was suggested that it would be helpful to them if they had an opportunity to come present to the Board of Education or the Citizens Review Committee. And so perhaps a team presentation of some sort, because there are issues that continue to lead the city and our demographers to believe that not only is the housing development continuing to be in the south and the southwest part of town, but so is the economic development, with the hospital and Meow Wolf and commuters from Los Alamos, from the labs. And so I think if we could have an opportunity to have maybe a shared stage and you could ask questions of city staff and our demographers, it would be very helpful. And then if there's anyone at the county that we could engage in that, that would be useful as well.
Board Member Carrillo?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Okay.
And just really quick,
Board Member
also on that
Castillo?
note that Secretary Noble knows about this, is there's still a huge phase of Tierra Contento that hasn't actually been approved and has gone forward, but it is actually master plan, so just kind of food for thought up there.
Thank you.
Shall I move on?
Please.
Okay. So we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about the shift in location of students. This is some information we shared last April, but 57%, we've had a 57% increase in students in the southwest of town since 2002. We're seeing a decrease in the number of students in El Dorado. I think back in the planning phases, 2009, 2010, when we were rebuilding El Dorado, there was still a lot of development out in the Galisteo Basin and other areas, and we assumed that there would be more housing out in that area, and El Dorado would see more students over time, and they really haven't. There's been a relatively flat number of students in the north, northeast, and central parts of Santa Fe. We have more school buildings in the north, northeast, and central parts of Santa Fe. We have more of them, they're aged, and they're generally smaller than the school buildings we've been building in the south and southwest part of town. As we've already mentioned, we have excess facility seats in the center and also the north northeast part of town, and we have flat to declining enrollment across the district. So really this is just a summary of the shifts we've spoken to this evening and in prior presentations. This is a map that articulates those issues we were just talking about. Where you can see the various areas of town as we've categorized them: central, south, southwest, northwest, northeast. And ARC presented this with us in April of last year, and it just emphasizes some of the points. You see that, like, for example, I was just speaking of in El Dorado, the way you'd use this map in the lower right-hand corner, that we're seeing a decrease in the number of students in that area over this time period. We looked at this, I think, in December. This might look familiar to you. Mm-hmm. This is the student locations over time. And you can see in 1995, those circles are the center of town. And that's where everyone lived. There wasn't housing in the south and southwest areas like there is today. By 2004, the growing south area and thinning of downtown is evident. You can see that in the center map. And then 2017, the current state, there's really a concentration in the south area and further thinning of downtown and south central. And these little dots, so these are geocoded maps of our students, and it's based on their addresses in Power School. This tells us where they register as living. And when you see clusters, it's probably houses on top of houses on top of houses, but also more than one student living in a dwelling can cause it to cluster. So after a while, you're not seeing just a single house at a time, you're seeing the density. If we're ready to go on to facility conditions, this is the next piece of information that came from the facility master plan and was updated in spring of 2017. But our submitted plan from December 2016 and approved plan showed over $260 million in facility needs district-wide. 8 school facilities met, or nearly met, that should say, the criteria for full replacement. Alvord, Nava, Capshaw, Latagoite, DeVargas, E.J. Martinez, Chaparral in the Activity Center at Santa Fe High School. We actually have money allocated to demolish that activity center when we're able to replace the square footage. As you know, DeVargas is being replaced for Milagro Middle School, and Alvord is currently in the process of a sale transaction. So we have the remaining facilities coming very near that criteria for full replacement that Public Schools Facility Authority puts forward for us, and we have a slide on that later. We've talked about the aging facilities in various parts of town. I won't go through these this evening, but I wanted for your reference to include information we've shared about how facility master plans are done and who's involved in gathering the information. That would be the community input and review, and how prioritization is done. So it's about a year-long process that gathers all of this information about enrollment, our facility conditions, our projections, and then we try and analyze that in a context that we can prioritize for the board what might be the most important projects to undergo over the bond cycle that accompanies the facility master plan.
Board Member Garcia.
Really quick question, Christie, on that page 21, it says community input and review. What kind of questions are asked of the principals? Do you know?
There's a set of questions that we bring to the principals. They are answered in writing prior to an interview, and then they are given the opportunity with either, a site-based committee or their staff to review the report on their school. So we engage them at various intervals. In addition, a team of architects and project managers, custodians, facility and maintenance workers tour the facilities, and they actually talk to the people who work on the ground in the facility. For this facility master plan, we had people checking and testing air quality on the spot, taking measurement of spaces. So there's a lot of interaction with the facility through various users. Not just one person represents the facility. All of our facilities are scored, and this is based on a weighted 1,000-point scoring system, and we're identifying our facilities with the greatest need for capital improvements. We look at 3 criteria, and it's the site. So how does the site meet the needs of the school or the program? The physical plant, so that's actually the parts of the building, how are they working? And adequacy conditions is about program. It's really how we're meeting the program needs. And so these 3 scores together then rank our schools across the district. And as we shared, as a part of the facility master plan and during the budget season in the spring, we have some elementary and middle school buildings falling to the bottom of the scoring system. And you see some we're talking about this evening: Chaparral, E.J. Martinez, Nava, down in the lower part of the rankings.
Board Member Garcia.
Quick, Christie, on the bottom right there, it says the scoring key, which is poor, satisfactory, as well as excellent. Who created that scoring?
This is a standard scoring mechanism that is used by Public Schools Facilities Authority and applied by our consultant and our staff. And we put together reports, and then we agree on the data that is used to generate these scores through a joint process. So even though we hire someone to do the facilities master plan, they're working with our construction project managers, our facilities directors, and our maintenance team to agree on these scores and the conditions in the 3 categories. So I spoke earlier of the schools that are nearing the criteria for renovation versus replacement. There are several that we named that are nearing the state criteria for replacement, and that is that the cost to repair or renovate would be 60% or greater than the cost to replace. Okay, and so we have several schools hovering in that category. So could we repair and renovate them, a few $100,000 or a couple million at a time? We could. In many ways, we put a lot of maintenance dollars towards these older schools because it takes so much more to keep their systems operating. But they're very close to the criteria that we would use to determine that we would recommend a replacement of them. In particular, the three facilities, the three schools that we were asked to revisit tonight, Chaparral, EJ, and Nava. This is just some data about them, not just their scores, but where they've been upgraded, issues on their site, the age of their facilities. I think it's helpful to look at the school ages at the bottom, and this is more for your reference than anything. Again, this is information that would tell us school by school of the three we're focusing on this evening, the cost to improve versus replace, and that's in the far right column. That would be probably the most relevant information to the discussion. And I think that you can see that there's a $38 to $74 million capital need at these schools, irregardless of what they're being used for or how the elementaries are enrolling. So we're going to talk about the enrollment just in the center of town, and I wanted to make sure that we're understanding school capacity as we go into that discussion. I know it was discussed some last week at the board meeting, but design capacity is something we typically only talk about at the onset of a facility's life, really when we're submitting for permitting and building it, but it's the total number of seats in the support facilities, so it's not a number we talk about a lot. The functional capacity considers your schedule flexibility. So functional capacity can appear larger than how we built an intended building or how we intended to build a building. I'll give you an example. The design capacity for El Camino Real, when we built the building in 2014, was around 750 to 800. But our functional capacity, given a certain schedule and enrollment type and use of program space, ARC is going to tell you could fit 900 to 1,000 students in that building. So that's how much they can differ. The program capacity is the most relevant, really, to our considerations around vacant seats. And that is because program is how we're using a building. So just because there's 14 classrooms in a building, we can't assume that every one of those classrooms will house a teacher with 20 plus students. Some of those 14 classrooms might have been programmed to be used for an art room, for example, or a computer lab. And so we have to take into consideration how the space is being used before we tell you how many vacant seats we see or how much capacity we have to accept transfers. It's probably the program capacity that we would want to revisit more frequently. And this is just a more in-depth definition of these capacities. So by school, we've included a couple of other schools in the center of town. I think it's important and relevant to the discussion in that if you look at the functional and program capacity of EJ, Nava, and Chaparral, and then you look at their adjacent schools, we see sort of the same thing that ARC is telling us. I mean, I think Mr. Romero and I put this chart together last week with Mr. Ryan's shop. And we're seeing exactly what ARC is telling us, that there's less students in the center of town. We have more seats available to us than there are students. In the lower right-hand corner, what's happened over the past 3 enrollment years is that we've gained more and more vacant seats. So if you look at the available seats and we just look at program capacity versus current enrollment, there's 491 vacant seats in these 5 schools in the middle of town. And I don't know if Mr. Romero wants to add anything to that.
No.
Okay.
Board Member Carrillo?
And Kate, you might know the answer to this, or Rudy. That project that was going to be off Agua Fria, that was infill, that was going to have like, it was apartments, right, like 400 total or 250, I can't remember. If I'm not mistaken, all of that would have been zoned Salazar, but based on where. So, I mean, it's just, and maybe when we have the joint thing with the city and the county, things like that can come up, how infill is so important. Because though that would fill Salazar School, I just wanted to check. Great, thanks.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, because I don't have that history. So where did they go?
Oh, there was the city didn't do it.
Oh.
There was enough NIMBYs and
I
people
just wondered where the
outraged.
kids went. Okay.
I remember that.
As per Santa Fe usual, no one wants to do anything progressive with relative to infill.
Board Member Garcia.
So just on that note, that was actually located at Agua Fria and Maze Road, which is one apartment complex. So now there's a new apartment complex, which is, you could throw a rock from the new Agua Fria school to this proposed new apartment complex, which is an additional 400+ units also.
Wow.
So there's two different apartment complexes we're talking about, one at the Agua Fria and Maze Road, and then one at South Meadows and 599.
So is that where
El Camino Real?
El Camino Real is
Yes.
now? Okay.
Wow.
Board President, should I go on to the
Please.
next section?
Please.
So I asked Architectural Research Consultants, ARC, to make these maps for us in the spring because we talk a lot about neighborhood schools and serving students in an area. And so I asked them to take Chaparral, Nava, and EJ. We can do this for any school. I do it often for various reasons. But we can look at the boundary area and then where students are living that are attending that school. And so the boundary area, I'll just do this one as an example. For Chaparral is a 2.375 square miles, and the students in the boundary, living and attending in the boundary area are in gray, and then the other students living and attending are outside of the gray and still noted, and it could be, it's most likely they're at the school on a transfer. So Chaparral shows, somewhat of a trend of being a neighborhood school with transfers from outside of the area. I'd have to get the count from Dr. Ryan's office to be sure on that one. And then Nava has a 0.8 square mile boundary, and you can see where the students are coming from. And then E.J. Martinez has a much larger geographical boundary.
Excuse me. Board Member Carrillo?
Nava, right, aren't, off of Highway 14 in that area, that's where we're busing kids in, isn't it?
Yes.
We actually, I'd have to refresh my memory, but we stopped busing students from the former Turquoise Trail area, I think 2 years ago.
Is that true?
Yes. So I think what happened is that students continued to opt to attend, and they're providing their own transportation. So we used to use it as a secondary boundary for the former Turquoise Trail area, and that's similar to what we're discussing for Amy Beale, where we have a primary and a secondary boundary, and that's where that history came from. Over a period of many years, students off of Highway 14 were bused to Nava, to Kearney, to the former Connie, Latagoite, and so this is students who have really continued to stay at the school but don't live in the area. They opted to stay in on a transfer after that secondary boundary was disbanded, more or less. The E.J. Martinez boundary area is well over 17 square miles. We talked about this a lot in the spring, that it's a fairly large area that extends all the way down I-25. It touches the El Dorado boundary. And so, this sort of is a different, we might look at this boundary a little differently in that it's not necessarily a neighborhood school and that students live nearby, walk to school, live in the immediate area. They're really quite spread out, the E.J. Martinez student population. Not just from transfers, but from the nature of the size of the boundary. So that concludes all of the information we have to share with you this evening. I'll give this back to Dr. Garcia to talk about next steps and what we're looking for in terms of guidance around the presentation.
Oh, he has his hand up, so.
Oh, when was it? I didn't see the hand. Okay.
So just really quick, Christy, on
Thanks.
On slide 18, I think this is pretty good. Actually, on slide 18, if you compare slide 18 with 14, if you just look at El Dorado, all the black dots in El Dorado since 1995 till 2017 have pretty much remained almost the same, if it looks like. And if you look at the chart on page 14, or slide 14, it actually has it just the way it's actually printed out there. One of the questions I have is how come we didn't go all the way down to Cerrillos and Madrid?
For the, I'm sorry, for the El Dorado boundary?
Oh, no, just for the kids that are down way south that you can't see on the map that live in Cerrillos or Madrid area. You know, because there's a lot of kids in
We
those
have
areas.
produced maps like that. I think we presented one last Tuesday for Amy Beal. It might just be the nature of fitting all three of them onto one slide, but we can certainly ask for the, you know, the
No, that's fine.
inclusion of
Was that
those.
the question, or was the question more, why is it in our school district?
No.
It's more just how the map looks, okay.
Is there 10 kids there, 5 kids there? Well, yeah.
Board Member Carrillo, oh, I'm sorry, Board Member Carrillo?
So next steps. And I'm sure,
Well, I was going to talk.
I know, but I want to, I mean, I think that it's germane that a week ago or so in board discussion, and then even prior when you and I spoke, why this is even here now. And it's because I think we owe it to the communities of those 3 schools to make sure that this discussion doesn't fall, because we have so much on our plate all of the time, right? And now we're going into budget. And making sure that this doesn't kind of fall off the radar so that 6 months prior to having to make a decision, maybe in 2019 or 20, then all of a sudden we get a huge reaction from those schools. So while I definitely appreciate the presentation, I've seen this movie a number of times, and hopefully I don't have to see it again. Hopefully now all the discussions around...
But you asked for it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, not necessarily the presentation. I'm not a big fan of presentations. More than anything, I wanted the discussion around if we need to transition, because we all know we need to transition, right? But if we need, when are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? How are we going to involve parents? And what's that going to look like?
Next steps?
So what I wanted to say is, in terms of what the staff is seeking, in terms of direction from the board, which I hope you will take an action on it, one way or the other, is whether or not you want us to come back with proposed timelines. How could you, first of all, does the board have an appetite for not renovating these schools over time? Just keep renovating.
Until we get to the 60%.
Well, I mean, I think that you could probably, it's not advisable. It's sort of like continuing to repair an old car, I mean, do you really want to do that? I mean, there's nothing in law that would prevent you. PSFA wouldn't approve, wouldn't recommend it. But again, it goes to, a community's bonding capacity. If you don't have it and that's the only school you had, I mean, you think of some schools around the state that sometimes that's the only option. So that's one thought. The other thought is, other ideas that you have around programming that you want us to pursue in terms of the facilities. The third is, but again, that comes with pros and cons, right? Because as if we have other programs there, it doesn't make the building de-age. You still have that situation going, so that doesn't go away. Do you want us to pursue a timeline for over the next 2 to 3 years for making that shift for school closure? So, we just want to know what you want us to study or just leave it alone. We're open to whatever you want us to pursue at this point.
Board Member Carrillo.
I think it's a great idea. But I think coming back to us maybe with 3 options at some point, and hopefully tonight we can decide on what those are.
Well, she had 3 ideas, you said.
Well, I mean, for instance, when I think of EJ, I know that we have the current, from ARC, current population, how many kids are going there, all these things. My biggest concern with EJ, less for Nava, is
she's gone.
The areas by Oshara, really, off of like Rabbit Road, Pecos Trail, that whole area that's not developed there. If that gets developed, where are those kids going to go? So it's really working also in that particular case with the city and county, because then we could very well say, okay, we really do want to rebuild this school because now we're going to have more condominiums, apartments, and low-income housing in that area. So, I mean, So it's trying to get projections from them. And then relative, I mean, I think all of us remember, and I hope Maureen's watching, all of us remember the conversations around the closures. And I think that what was made very clear and was subsequently accepted by the school populations and families was the understanding of the facilities master plan, how it works, why it works, and why eventually sometimes schools have to close. And while it was a very emotionally charged issue, I think that after the weeks of study, it just became clear that sometimes you've got to make this decision. And if Maureen, if you're watching, I have the political will to do the right thing, because I know that when she used that phrase, she may as well have just been glaring right at me when she said it. But I didn't have the political will, 4 months before school starts to do something like that to the community. So I would want us to look at, if we have to transition those two schools, what is a plan for what transitioning looks like? What might be the best relative to the well-being of kids and families? And that is, do you slowly get rid of taking enrollment for kinder first, second? I mean, I personally believe that sucks the lifeblood out of an elementary school. I mean, I think that this is just, I don't have all of these studies or anything, but I think the better thing is, and you can come back to us with this, you still accept kids in these grades at the same time saying, something, you're going to be here this year and maybe next, but when you're when you're 7 years old, this is what we're going to be doing. Much the way parents would probably prep their kids if they had to, leave New Mexico and move to Southern California. That's my overarching concern, is if we are going to not use those facilities, and I imagine one or the other may continue to be used, how we transition families and kids. Teachers, I know, will transition according to the CBA, and we'll make sure that they have work within the district.
Board Secretary Noble.
Thank you, President Price, and I appreciate this presentation. I think it's really important to look at a lot of the factors that are outlined here, and it's really, really good. And I hope that we all spend some time digesting the information here. A couple questions. In 2014, 3 district charter schools left the district to become state charters. What's the impact of that on our capital budgeting?
I might look to Mr. Grunler to help with this one, but as far as capital budget or funding, if a state charter is in a publicly owned facility, we can still consider that as a part of our facility master plan. So, a couple of examples. Even though Turquoise Trail is in our facility, which we include in our facility master plan, incidentally, and they're a state charter, we would want to continue to improve that building. However, maybe Mr. Grunler can help me think of an example of someone who's not in our district and not in our building. Monte del Sol. Are they in a publicly owned building? Then they would qualify for district capital funds. So, you live somewhere on the continuum as a charter. But again, the prioritization all comes back to the Citizens Review Committee and the Board of Education. So, we can look at ATC as another charter example, still a district charter in a publicly owned facility. It took 2 or 3 bond cycles for them to get their facility plan approved and prioritized. So I guess you fall somewhere along the continuum as a state charter. And Mr. Grunler might want to add something to that.
Mr. Grumman.
President Price, Secretary Noble, Superintendent, for 3 of the funds, it doesn't make any difference. For SB 9, for HB 33, and for ETN, it's all based on a percentage of students on the 40th day count, whether they were district charters or state charters. That's the way the statute's set up. For the general obligation bond, which Ms. Shonda Wagner was describing, it's at the board's discretion for a district charter if any GO bond monies are allocated to that school. That's just for a district charter. So the state charters do not have, under statutory, how the statute describes it, state charters don't have participation in districts' GO bond funds. They have to apply in a different way for state funds. So that's the biggest difference when those three charters went to the state charter as far as it applies to capital funds. Now, as far as it applies to other funds, you know, they were being covered by district transportation and food service, of which now they're not. We decided not to respond to the RFP that the state charters put out, but we're still supporting ATC.
I would like to ask the board, I'm feeling inclined to ask for timelines so that we can do what Board Member Carrillo has also said. We can think about this and we can put out the information so that parents and the schools will know what are possibilities 2 or 3 years down the line. So I don't know how you all feel about that, but I don't want to ask them to do that again if you all don't want that.
Also, I want to be clear, if we're talking, you know, like for each school.
Yeah.
Are we including all 3? Are we just looking at 2 of them? You know, the enrollment's a little bit higher in Chaparral, but I just want to be real clear which schools we're talking about too.
Before we go on.
Board Member Noble, Secretary Noble.
Thank you. Is there any current bond funding in the general obligation bond or anywhere else allocated to any of these 3 schools?
Board President Price and board members, there's I think $1 million allocated to study the issue, and I have to look to see if it's Chaparral, Nava, and EJ, all 3 listed, but we had a small set aside to study this issue because you know, our planners identified this as something we need to study.
Can you say a little more about what this is?
The issue that we have these 3 aged facilities, Chaparral, Nava, and EJ, with declining enrollments and high capital need. And so we set aside about $1 million to study it. I don't know what that study would look like.
If I may, Board President, and I think I'm going to stretch my time. I have a personal commitment. I'll stay for about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Because we're getting to the meat of something, but then I really will have to go because this was my time to walk out.
You're going to stage a walkout?
No, I was supposed to leave at 6:15, but I'm going to stay as long as I possibly can, and they'll deal without me. A few things, and I heard that there was maybe even a request by city staff to come and talk to us, and so I just want to make a few comments on some factors that I think we might even want to think about. And I really, you know, again, want to stress how much I like this presentation, because as I went through and wrote down some of my questions, a lot of them were answered as we went through, including the capacity and number of seats in each schools, the transfer ins, transfer out, that sort of thing. I like that chart a lot. So I've said through our last budget cycle that I think that one of the key concerns that we should be thinking about as a district is how to be more competitive in the educational arena. I think that if we're not doing that, that we are on a slow strangulation track, and I personally would like to see us really breathe life into the public education system as much as possible. And so in the big picture, I'm thinking a lot about that and how we attract students out of the private system in particular, charter schools, how we continue to improve, and I know that's something we all agree on. I have questions about the overall model because I see economic trends over time, and we have moved away from neighborhood schools to a more industrial model where we are somewhat obsessed with economies of scale, and I understand that, but we seem to have gone to a trend of building larger buildings on the outskirts of town as opposed to neighborhood schools. And honestly, my glancing at some of the trends might tell me that that pendulum may be swinging back with things like charter schools coming in and doing things differently. So again, I just hope we can all keep in our minds, and I appreciate that Ms. Wagner sort of said, you know, there's these issues around neighborhood schools and looking at the size of the zones and that sort of thing, because are we willing to really embrace one model and continue to move in the way we've been moving? I also want us to think about, and some of these things have been touched upon, you know, the ARC information, I think, and there's sort of a conflicting, we believe the demographers and we don't. They've picked up and identified a lot of decent trends that include issues around job creation and housing. And I really appreciate that. And one of the things that I think Dr. Garcia was touching upon is that there is increasing conversation around, in the parlance, is often known as accessory dwelling units. In Santa Fe, we might just call them casitas. And there is, as far as I can tell in the political discourse, an increasing desire to use accessory dwelling unit policy better and to really try, and the appetite is growing for real infill in some capacity, whether it's ADUs or vacant lots, something like it was called Blue Buffalo, but there was another name for it that was going to be on the Ecoversity property that was a very large apartment complex. Another thing that, you know, I think has been a consideration in this district in the past, particularly around Carlos Gilbert, is employment centers. So, you know, I think there was a sense at one point that Carlos Gilbert was the school that city employees transfer to because it's nearby City Hall and the epicenter of that employment. And I have wondered aloud a few times about EJ being right next to where we are likely to see some of the greatest employment growth in this city in the healthcare sector and around the hospital. We are, there are projections around job creation that the largest arenas are healthcare and education. And the hospital is not just the hospital, it's a medical center around there. So I wonder, I mean, personally, if and I've heard this from a number of people who work in the downtown area and live more south side, that they might like to have their children closer to them during the day, which is where they are, and therefore, you know, thinking about, and I don't know if there are precedents in other districts for looking at zoning around employment, and how that would layer on with state law and other things for our zoning transfers. Also, we are, when I look at these, some of the population facts and economic trends here, they're really good factoids, and to some extent we see births, as is often the case, tracking to economic upturn and downturn. And so, you know, county births increased from 2001 to 2007. Perhaps not coincidentally, we went into recession in early 2008. They came down precipitously, and then they maybe started to stabilize in 2015. We are, in my view, economically looking at an economic upturn, and we might want to think about our future as well as our demographic past. And I know we're doing that, and some of that is what ARC does and whether we believe the demographers are not. And the other thing is, looking at the turnover of property cycles. Because we are, and I don't know, but living in the Gonzales district near Casa Solana, which is in part a decently dense development. I think it would be interesting to look at the analysis of the turnover there. Anecdotally, as long as we're doing that, because we seem to be doing a certain amount of it, I would say that's also happening in the EJ district, which is where, and I think I said this before in the discussion around EJ, I went to that school. My parents are aging in place. They may be part of the problem in that school district, but it's wonderful that my son gets to spend time in my childhood bedroom and other things like that. But anecdotally, in that neighborhood, there are a lot more subdivisions, accessory dwelling units, and there is starting to be turnover to younger families. And actually, a number of them I know personally are transferring from that district into the Atalaya district. And every family has their own individual reasons for what they're doing, but just reporting what I see. So, I'd love to see what we understand around the turnover. And frankly, the Nava district is pretty dense and pretty perfect for families to go into. Through our process in the budget last year in these conversations, I really fell for Nava. And I see that the, transfers in are larger than the transfers out in the chart for Nava, and that strikes me as a successful thing, and I don't think we should take for granted when a school is being successful in attracting students and desirable in terms of transfers. So that's something I'm certainly looking at. And the other thing is, obviously there's a new mayoral term. There will be 3 new city councilors at the city. And as I said before, we are, in my view, looking at a new, maybe even unprecedented appetite to deal with a housing crisis that has been in place for decades in Santa Fe, but frankly has reached a sort of fever pitch as we've seen rents go up about 30% in 2 years. And there is a will in this community to, I think, really address the problem in some comprehensive ways that we haven't seen before. So I don't have answers, and I think that on next steps, we certainly need to take a responsible approach and look at a lot of different things going on, including how our policies might change, how turnover might occur, and the other thing that I really just, to me, want to keep top of mind is as we've moved from a sort of neighborhood school model to a more industrial economies of scale school model, there's been a lot of trends, again, looking out over the economic history, recent economic decades, where everything was sort of obsessed with economies of scale and manufacturing efficiencies, and it sort of feels as if we tried to make teachers into factory workers and kids into widgets. And obviously they're not that, and as someone who spent a lot of time looking at manufacturing and economic trends, I am deeply and profoundly aware that schools are human systems, not manufacturing systems, and that I hope that we can all be aware that psychological impact is very real when we're talking about that. When I look at the transfers, I honestly kind of discount the transfers out of the EJ and Nava districts for this current academic year, in part because of conversations we had last year. And I personally have come across half a dozen families at least who have said, I would have gone to that school, but I heard the conversations you had, and so I transferred out. So, there are a lot of factors. Some of them are psychological, and I am somewhat concerned that we, And I appreciate Vice President Cashman's sort of what is the will, and you know, I think it's a good question, because I also think if we keep talking about this and saying we might not, that we will have a negative psychological effect on these schools, and you can start sort of, you know, have a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so these are a lot of factors that I'm looking at, and, you know, I hope that we can get to more virtuous cycles where we really are talking about how we improve our competitiveness, how we celebrate some of the great things that are happening. You know, NAVA is clearly doing something right. A lot of it, I think, is around the Artworks program, as, again, anecdotal evidence. People love that. There are some really special things there. And I am not an expert on the properties, and I know there's a lot of science around the properties, but you know, I look at the NAVA chart and I'm like, well, they just need an HVAC system. So anyway, I look forward to talking more. This is a lot of information to digest, and I hope we are both looking at the standard wisdom and best practices, and trying to update and innovate how we approach this, and really look to the future competitiveness of the school district, and don't take for granted some of the things that are really special and are going well in the district. So that's all.
One big, beautiful, long sentence.
One big, beautiful long sentence like that. I actually, anyway, I'll tell you a story about that, because I was thinking of you earlier. And I apologize, I need to go.
Okay.
But I'm going to be watching, right? To know what we say.
Oh, Maureen?
Maureen?
Yes, I would like to chime in on that. Can I speak now?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I want to talk, and I've taken some notes. If you look at slide number 29, there are just within a traditional elementary school, there are 491 vacancies. That's not our K-8. I'm really concerned. If you said, which I know we don't, but if you said 30 students per class, that's 18 teachers that we need. And, you know, it's crazy. We can't employ all of those teachers. So by continuing to keep extra capacity, we are shortchanging our kids. We don't have the teachers to fill those classrooms. We can keep on talking about this and saying the slide presentation looks great and it's a lot of information. This is not new information. We have had this information. I think the board needs to make some decisions moving forward. I would support, and I think the board members know, I would support consolidation, closure, or an entire district rezoning. You know, this weekend, my mother lives in Rancho Viejo. A family moved in from New Jersey. They have 2 little kids that are probably in 2nd and 4th grade. They're lucky that they moved in now in January. If they had moved in June, they wouldn't be going to Amy Beale. We've got to do something, and we've got to start thinking about, everybody would love to have a small little schoolhouse. That's not the reality, and it's not equitable to have some of our kids in larger schools and then some kids sitting in smaller schools. You know, we need to start trying to right-size this district. This problem has been years in the making, and, you know, this board has a responsibility to our schools, to our community, to our kids, to make sure all of our kids have the same educational opportunities, not just some of our kids. So I think the board needs to be, telling the superintendent, that we need a timeline and what's either on the table or off the table. You know, and I know Board Member Carrillo and I, you know, talked about political will. I know we have 3 board seats that will be coming up for election next year. What is the timeline? Are we going to have a timeline before elections or after elections? How much time are we giving our families to plan? Because we're not giving my families and Amy Beale and Cerrillos and Madrid, you know, they're going to have to go to overflow schools. I hope your decision is right, but I don't see that happening. And we have development continuing in Oshara. Rabbit Road has been approved for development. How soon that will happen, who knows? But, you know, so we can't keep on saying for the South Side kids, you stay in overcrowded classrooms, or because we can't find enough teachers, you have multiple subs throughout the year. We know we have a teacher shortage, and by having excess capacity and having some schools have small classrooms and others that are packed to what is allowed by the CBA and state law, you know, to me, that's not a good situation.
Thank you, Board President. On the agenda item, it talks about Chaparral, EJ Martinez, and Nava. So I also agree that we should have some sort of a time frame with different options on those time frames. Also, I'm a little bit new to these 3 schools as to what happened in the last 2 or 3 months, but is the reason for possibly looking at shutting down those schools, is that because of the enrollment rate, or is it because of budget, or is it both?
I think that there are multiple issues, and one of them that I didn't get a chance to respond to Secretary Noble. Let's just say enrollments were perfect at those schools, met capacity. Okay?
Pull this closer, because I can...
I'm sorry. Let's just say that the enrollment was there at those schools, or we created magnet schools, or we came up with some really fabulous, innovative ideas. It does not take away the issue that these are aging facilities. I mean, putting in a brand-new program there does not change the structural issues that we have and our bonding capacity. You know, we went to a $100 million bond. That increased taxes. $100 million isn't going to get you those buildings and all your other needs that we have, and addressing, if, you know, what you all are saying, you kind of question the demographers on the south side of what's happening there. So let's just say they're wrong. You're going to have a crisis in that there's only so much that the taxpayers are going to want to provide you. You're not going to get money from the state because we have bonding capacity. So this is a real issue. Now, if you choose to do what Board Member Carrillo, and I hope it's okay that I quote you, an agua fria bandage approach, I mean, I guess you could do that, but then are you being good stewards of the public's money in terms of your fiduciary responsibility? It's just sort of like I said earlier, taking an old car and continuing to repair, you know, the transmission, and then you repair the serpentine belt, and then you repair and pretty soon you've put more money into the car than what the car is worth. And that's where we're at, is that these facilities are approaching that critical piece. So it's apart from the program, it is the issue that we're dealing with here of aging facilities. And that won't change that aspect of it. And so that's the real issue, Board Member Garcia. However, there are savings to be had that could be put into enhancing educational programming in some of our other schools. There was a savings in operational dollars that we save in administration and counseling and custodial, et cetera. So we see operational savings. We see a shift in what we could do in capital savings. And then there's the equity issue also that Ms. Cashman brought up. I hope that answers your question. Did that answer your question?
I'm going to further answer.
Board Member Carrillo?
If you remember when we were doing the facilities master plan, when we looked at these 3 schools, we had to really think about going, projecting outward even to the next bond cycle, would the community have the appetite for approving the 2021 bond if it included rebuilding an elementary school in a part of town where we don't have kids? And so, that's just really bluntly putting it there, and that's what one of Maureen's biggest concerns is. And as well, the operational piece about taking all of this square footage offline, because these kids will now be in other schools. And so it really came down in a great way to money and bonding. And then in terms, we know that at least this board in the last 5 years, 6 years even, has not wanted to repeat what we call the Agua Fria syndrome, throwing millions and millions and millions on top of that property when it was on the corner of Henry Lynch and Agua Fria. And it wasn't even close to where the kids were. It was in the far corner. All of the kids were way down Agua Fria near South Meadows. So it's really kind of looking at that. And the conversation really came up around the closure because we thought we were planning many different plans, one of which was a major budget shortfall. So if it really did end up being 6 to 7 million, we would have had to take drastic measures. And luckily it didn't end up that way. So that's why these 3 schools are being looked at the way they are. Age, enrollment, and whether or not we really could, build another elementary on this side of town, given the current situation.
I also wanted to add on that point that we are, as a staff, continuing to look at how we can enhance program, how we can increase our competitiveness. I think the board, took some very progressive moves with ECO and Mandela and Academy, Bridge, looking at that. But we continue to talk about innovations of how we can increase our competitiveness and to provide more innovative programming. And so that, doesn't mean won't happen if we didn't have these schools. We will still continue to work with our principals and look at how we can enhance our curriculum and make our schools exciting, innovative places.
I'd like to go back to my suggestion that we ask the superintendent and her staff to come up with a timeline. But I don't want to ask her, we did this last year, and we didn't carry through with it for good reasons. But I would like, if we're going to do that, I don't want us to do that if we're not going to consider it. Because that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree, and I almost say maybe by the end of May, in terms of having some really concrete decisions on what we want to do and maybe having a meeting before then. Well, I don't know, we'd have to, planning, so that would give us, this is what, 2018? So that's fall of 2018, 2019. So if there was the thought or the decision on closure, maybe it wouldn't happen till fall of 2020. And that gives the district families and everybody ample time. And when they both were speaking, one of the things I thought of, and I really respect the work that your department does, Christy, because all these chess pieces moving around, it boggles the mind.
It's
right?
three-dimensional chess.
Right. Because I'm thinking about Oshara, okay? And if Oshara is going to expand the way we expect it to, it can't go to Amy Beale. There's going to be a point at which, and anyone watching, and Amy Beale and Oshara, I'm not saying you're removed, okay? So don't go all crazy. But there is going to be a point in time when perhaps that development is going to have to be rezoned to Chaparral or EJ, right? And I would say you want to grandfather in. Did you hear the words grandfather, everybody? Grandfather in maybe those kids that are currently there, but given where Oshara is, and if it were to expand the way we fully expect it to, even with getting Turquoise Trail online, it's not going to be able to go to Amy Beale. So that is going to make us have to look at, okay, is it going to Chaparral or EJ? And if it's going to go, we know that we have to rebuild one of those schools, no matter what. And my understanding and the sense of the board a while ago was it would likely be Chaparral rather than EJ because Chaparral is more of the neighborhood school. The property lends itself to a greater size if we needed to do that. And it would just financially make more sense. But what if that development, so that's why I bring in that. And I would want that to be included in any plan that was brought back to us. Because I'd hate for us to make some plan and then decide, oh my God, we have 400 more
Yes.
kids this side of St. Mike's, what are we going to do?
Dr. Garcia?
And on that point that Board Member Carrillo made, is that the board already took an action to create, basically, by de facto, a secondary boundary. We'll be bringing that back because we didn't officially call Pinon the secondary boundary.
Yeah.
We capped, we capped by grade,
Yeah.
Amy Beal.
Yeah.
And so, right now, we do have parents, whether it's Oshara or some other area, we just had 3 recently that moved into Amy Beal that have been sent to a secondary boundary. And so, this will just continue to be exacerbated. I guess what I want to be very clear is what because you kind of, you've already set some dates, and I don't know if that's what the board's going to take action on, or whether you want us to bring back, I know you
I was
said
thinking
May.
I was thinking of timeline with, we may or may not take action in May, but to get the timeline.
For what? For closure, for reboundering, for,
Could be for both.
so I just want you guys to be real clear with us
Yeah.
about what the motion is and what it is you're requesting of us.
Well, we can't make a motion.
Yes, you
We can.
can.
We can make a suggestion.
Well, no, you can. You can take
Okay.
possible action.
Okay.
Just, also in the timeframe, I guess I'd like to see how we're informing the principals. Thank you, principals, for being here tonight. Informing the principals and the parents of these schools, because, they read it in the paper the next day, and we're closing down the schools, and we haven't thought about this, and I just got this letter today, and my schools are closing down. What am I doing? The sky's falling. And so I would just like to see how, within that time frame, how we're actually going to sit with this.
That's one of the reasons why we didn't do it last year. It was very emotional and very difficult, so that's why I'm asking for time for us to plan this, and so that everyone knows or understands what possibly is coming.
And also,
Yes.
just in regards to the redistricting, is the Board of Education going to go through an entire redistricting of the Santa Fe Public Schools? And if so, when, how does this play into it?
We did a lot of redistricting last year, but it keeps coming up because we keep having problems. Board Member Carrillo? I'm sorry, were you done, Board
Yes.
Member?
I think that I would ask then that maybe by the end of May, the board is making a decision on what we're going to do with those 3 schools. An actual decision. Which one or 2 of them we're going to rebuild, the logistics of which I would leave to Christy and her department, because maybe if we knew, we were closing one, we would move one into the other while it was being rebuilt. The same way we did with Atalaya and with Sweeney, right, using Connie School. But so by the end of May, really having us make a decision. That decision would also include, if there was closure as part of it, how the transition would take place. Grades, all that sort of stuff. Now, if that's going to happen by the end of May, that means that this information can't come to us in the middle of May, right? Because it used to be the practice before Dr. Boyd got here, that sometimes we would get information on a night saying, you got to make a decision tonight. It's like, what do you mean? We just got this book, And so back mapping, essentially, what our planning is, what would be a comfortable timeline for you, because I'm also very cognizant that we're going to be in the crunch of budget. Is it now we're already middle of January, but is it like middle of April? Is it beginning of April? Is that a reasonable timeline to maybe have 3 plans? Or, because I don't want to stress staff's resources.
Well, I've also heard several things now, because we talked about at one point we were talking closure, another point we were talking about possible reboundaries. We've also talked about rebuilding of a school, which is brand new language, and we hadn't talked about that. So I'm not clear what it is. We're kind of like back to where we started. You know, I think that there was data presented, and I think the staff doesn't, I mean, we want to do what you want us to do. We presented you the age of the buildings, where the enrollment is, why, we've talked about the pros and cons of why we would rebuild or not. Do we have the, you know, capacity in terms of a community to rebuild one of these schools in the near future? You've got the demographers telling us enrollment looks pretty flat, but you're all feeling like, no, it may really increase on the south side. We've got all of those issues, right? And so we need a little more direction about what kind of a plan you want us to come back with. Is it around closure, or is it around, I don't know what, Christy, help me here, rebounding? I mean, I'm not certain. You know, then we heard Ms. Noble's recommendation that we look at program. I mean, you all know the pluses and minuses of all of this. You know the dollars and cents pretty much that we're talking about here. A new elementary is what, probably in around 25 million maybe?
Right.
Maybe higher, you know, as we look, you know, prospectively. So I'm not clear still, I'm sorry.
Christy, you looked like you were going to say something.
Excuse me?
I'm sorry. Go on.
Board Member Carrillo?
Oh, I thought Christy was going to respond to what Dr. Garcia said, so I was going to let her do that before I said anything.
Did you have something you wanted to respond to?
I think that, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the task is yet either. But from a sheer numbers standpoint, from facility conditions, opportunities on the site, traffic issues, costs associated with building, you know, a facility planner could recommend which of these campuses is the most viable to rebuild, and what that might look like to consolidate, rebound, retransition. Those are the words I'm hearing, but I think that the rebuilding is sort of new conceptually this evening. So, you know, given the right direction, I think from just a logistical and a fact-based standpoint, you can study issues.
We just need a little bit more parameter.
I think, yes, go ahead.
Then I would say one of the things we'd want to have maybe in a month or 6 weeks is, from a master planner, which of the facilities is the most viable to rebuild? We'd want to have that. And I don't know why people are thinking rebuild is a new word tonight. We've been talking about this. I mean, it was during last budget session, we talked about that we're going to have to rebuild one of these schools no matter what. We knew that we'd have to do that.
Last year, we were talking about Chaparral.
Right. But I mean, the rebuild, we were using that word because we knew we had to do it. The question is, and my guess is in the 2021 bond, yeah, we could probably rebuild one school, but two? No, because I mean, at this time it was like 15 to 18 million for elementary. No, we could do that in the 2021 bond probably pretty easily. I mean, granted, there's all these other needs, but two? I don't know. So then, so that would be one thing to bring back. The other thing to bring back, as I see it, I mean, correct me if, you know, and Maureen, I want to, you know, forget that she's not with us.
Maureen, are you still there? Maureen? I guess she's not.
Maybe talk like
She might be.
Maureen, are you still there?
The other thing I'd want is, if one of the ideas was to rebuild Chaparral and close the other schools, I'd want to have information on, okay, what's that transition going to look like? So I think I'm being really specific. I want that, what's that?
You are, and we just got to make sure that
Okay,
that there's
what
a
would that
motion.
transition look like?
I'm here.
In terms of, oh, great, in terms of.
Yes, I'm here and I'm listening. I want to jump in.
Okay.
Yes, I'm still here.
We heard you.
I think we need to bring that closer. She can't hear you. And so what that would be like the second piece. What would that look like? And for me, the third piece would be, and maybe we do have to, no, I don't think we have to do an inaugural-free approach, but if it comes from the research that we actually will need, EJ, because of all of that growth, then what would be the plan to maybe do it in phases, taking care of EJ's facility or Nava, whichever, those are the three things that I would want to come back with. And so if we're making a decision by the end of May,
Well, we have to decide on this together.
oh, I know that, but if we're all making a decision also by the end of May, when is it reasonable to expect from staff, and I'm thinking maybe first or second week of April, to have that information so that we have time to digest it, go to all of our PTCs, principals, families. There.
Maureen, you had something you wanted to say? Maureen?
She's listening on TV, so it takes her a minute.
Oh, that's right. She's got a delay, yeah.
Maureen, are you there? Maureen, are you there?
The speaker.
Maureen, are you there?
Yeah, I'm sorry about the delay. There's
Yeah.
a time delay from me
Yeah.
talking to you, and so that's why I kept on saying I'm here, but there was a time delay. What I think the approach might be is we have 3 facilities that are coming to the end of their life cycle. Can we eliminate all 3 facilities? I don't think we can. So I agree with Board Member Carrillo. Probably 1 facility will need to be rebuilt in the next bond. But I also think probably what we need to look at is a total redistricting of the district. So we move the kids to where they are. And, we have some schools that really cannot exist without interzone transfers. Maybe if we're closing a school, that some of those kids would be moving into. So, for example, Wood Gormley zone might become bigger to accommodate kids that are in the central part of town. So I think probably what I think we need is a timeline, first of all, of the 3 facilities we're talking about. Can we close all of them? I don't think so. So I agree with Board Member Carrillo. Which one is the most viable one to rebuild in 2021? And then how do we right-size the district? Because remember, we have vacant seats at Gonzales, and I believe Aspen has some vacant seats, and El Camino Real is getting overcrowded. So we've got to shift kids around, and it may require a total rezoning and making bigger zones or narrowing the zones depending upon which part of town you're living in.
Now I have a question for you. What does your calendar look like with your senior staff? Is May doable?
Well, I'm going to defer to Christy because her department's going to do most of the work. There'll be some, on the financial side as we look at, what the impacts would be to the operational budget as we build budget. But I think that wouldn't be that difficult. It really is on Christy and your capacity with staff if, April or May. But if we're not thinking of making any shifts really for the 2018-2019 school year, does it have to be May? Can we
That's
bring
what I
it
was
to
thinking.
you in June?
That's what I'm asking.
Because we're still talking a couple of years out.
Well, the only reason I said May is if you want to have parent participation and everything else, June is when people start to split.
So your thought about the parent participation is...
Or it can be June, it's fine.
Yeah, well, I get it.
That's why I asked the question
but I
about
get
your
it.
calendar.
Yeah, I just wonder, Christy,
Is May doable, or is June better?
Board President Price, Superintendent Garcia, I have to get with our consultants. Our team has changed a little bit from architectural research consultants, and it'd be a matter of updating the facility master plan. I have a couple of other planners I could call on, and we could do some comparisons. Most people could probably turn around just the nuts and bolts of the work in a couple of months. But I need to have really clear questions when I go to the consultants. And, it has to be, everybody has to be on the same page. I need to know exactly what I'm asking them to do, and I need to give them very clear direction. So I'm not exactly sure we're at that point yet.
So what I'm, getting, in terms of a synopsis of all the things that we're hearing, is that you would like us to address rebuilding possibly one facility, closure, and rezoning. And the rezoning piece, though, appears to be broader than just these three schools. It seems to be rezoning the entire district, which has a community input element in it and timelines, right, per policy, correct, Christy?
Yes.
And this would be to address capital and operating needs of all of these schools. So it looks like, the zoning piece could be much broader than these three. So if we brought back the recommendation, if you took action now, the first step would be for us to come back to you. So maybe you don't put a timeline on your action. You say, we want you to go back and scope, get a scope of work and figure out what's a reasonable timeline. Then we come back to you with that, and then we move from there.
I feel good about that.
Because tonight, I don't think we can tell you we can have it by May or April or June. We might be able to have it by March, I don't know, but we need to talk to them. Then once you decide, yes, we want you to take this course of action, then that then kicks off whether there's community meetings, what we have to do around boundaries, and then a final timeline for you to make a final decision. It would make sense to me that would be the timeline. And then the bond, the GO bond wouldn't be for another 6 years anyway. 4 years, well, 4? No, 5.
2021.
2021 already? Wow. We just did it last year, right?
Time flies, huh?
Yep, when you're having fun. Board Member Carrillo, and then Board Member Garcia.
And I know, Maureen, there's a delay for you, but we also have to include El Dorado in the mix. And because they have declining enrollment, and it would almost make sense, and Christie's team would know better than anyone, that where you're extending their boundary into some of the current EJ boundary and, into that whole area that's being built out, that's even part of the Amy Beal challenges. So if I'm hearing correctly then, when do we want staff to come back to us with probable, like we're not May, right? Let's say it's June when we have to make our decisions, and they're going to come back to us. The first step is
to find out how soon can we bring you the decision?
Okay, and when do we want to know that?
Well, I think that, Christy, probably within the next few weeks, you would be able to, once very clearly, which it looks like we're looking at, which school are we going to possibly rebuild, which ones are we going to close, what does that mean in terms of, the boundaries and all of that. That's what we're going to ask these consultants, whoever it is, how soon can you bring us a decision? We should be able to possibly do that within a couple of weeks, I would think. And so I would say no later than the end of February, we should be able to come to you to say, we'll have this, maybe sooner, I'm saying no later than the end of February, to tell you we'll have something to you by June, we'll have something to you by May, we'll have something to you by April, I don't know.
We have a regular school board meeting on the 20th of February.
Right. But it seems like there's a step that's missing, right? The how soon can you have stuff for us is the first step. Then bringing...
She's telling you, yeah,
right.
She's saying...
And then bringing plans to us is the second step. Right, is the second step. And then the third step is the board making decision. So if we're back mapping from, let's say June 30, because we're all on everyone goes away in July. So, or June 15, let's say middle of June, is
Well,
what...
we may have this done sooner. That's what I'm
Which is
also
fine.
hearing. So I'm not feeling like I need to tie them to artificial dates. I'm saying, let's take the first step, which is February 20th.
And then we back map from that.
Right.
I still want to make sure that we've got this whole darn thing done by end of May, second week of June.
What if the company or the consultants say they're going to need till July 15th?
You mean after the first step is done, then they come back and then July 15th just to give
That's
us
why
the
I'm
second
saying-
step?
and
No,
that's
then
why-
that's not okay.
Well, that's not okay with you.
It's not okay, I think, and I'll...
I mean, this is all an academic discussion. My guess
That's
is
right.
that they'll probably do it. What I'm just suggesting, and I'm not trying to be difficult, is why don't we just go with what the consulting firm tells us?
Then why don't we try to have that by the middle of February, because that's 4 weeks.
Well, that's what I said.
So let me go back to what I said about 10 minutes ago. How about February the 20th? Is that all right? Okay, so let's have a motion on that, please.
So just for clarity on so by February, the end of February, staff's going to come back with recommendation for timelines, dates.
February the 20th.
Right.
We're going to bring back to you what the consultants tell us, what they think they can provide the work for us, on which school to potentially look at closure, to be able to look at the boundaries, all of that.
And
So,
just on that note, I guess I don't understand what our hurry is for this, because if we're
I
actually
don't
gonna-
either.
If we're going to build a brand-new school, that's if we're going to build a brand-new school, that's great, but...
But this is just for recommendations.
Right. So 2021 is a bond, that's still 6 years out before that school
right.
can even get built,
That's
if
right.
it's passed by the voters. So I don't understand why we're in a time frame to look at these 2 or 3 schools, because 3 or 4 months ago, I thought the Board of Education told the audience that we were not going to close their schools.
We also have the following, till the 27th, we have Finance Subcommittee. So, things are getting,
and if we're early, we might be able to do the study session on the 13th. I'm just saying, just give us a little wiggle room
Yes.
if they can't, maybe they have other clients ahead of us. I mean, there might be other factors why it could push it to the end of February.
There are 2 things. First, the motion, and second, I want to address Rudy's concerns.
so you're seconding the motion?
What
Is that what you just said? Oh, you didn't make the motion?
So I'll make one.
Let's
You
hear
make
it.
Then the motion is to direct the superintendent to work with staff to find out the timelines our contractors need to begin planning for these 3 schools.
Okay,
And
That's the
rezoning.
and rezoning, yeah.
That includes planning for these 3 schools.
And
Okay.
district rezoning.
But I don't know that we need full district by then. I mean, I disagree with Maureen there, that we need full district rezoning by then. We know what's going on with pretty much everything, like on the other side of St. Michael's or of,
So you have a motion.
The motion was just the language I used. Those 3 schools.
I just wanted to ask staff if she felt that we can look at those in isolation with that, or do we need the whole rezoning piece?
I think that we need to include any rebounding or reassignment areas that would be associated with the rebuilding and/or consolidation and possible closure of these 3 schools. So there are probably a half a dozen or more schools impacted. There are a lot, but it doesn't stretch all the way to Nina Otero as an example.
Not 27 schools.
Right.
Right.
And related rezoning.
Related.
Fine.
So is that your
there a second?
motion?
Well, I've lost the words now, but,
What she said,
sure, and you can go back and, yeah,
and I'll second.
all right. And then after we vote, I want to address what Rudy said.
There's discussion.
Yeah, discussion. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Well, I don't want to vote yet, because you said you wanted to say something.
Well,
this is-
but does she have discussion? Or I don't know if there's
I
anyone
want to
else.
say something relative to, I want to vote, and then I want to say something relative to the second part of what Rudy said, in a nutshell, what's the hurry? And I want to address that.
Maureen, can you hear me?
It's a little bit of a delay.
Just going to ask what the motion is.
Rudy, can you talk?
She heard it?
Rudy, can you talk? Can you just pick up?
For some reason, she doesn't work. She doesn't want to hear this. Maureen, are you there?
Your voice is too soft, ma'am.
Maureen,
Yeah, I can hear you, but before we vote, maybe we should address, have Board Member Carrillo talk with Board Member Garcia about what's the hurry.
All right,
Okay, I'll do it now.
thank you.
The hurry is.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, before we take a vote, I would like to have Board Member Carrillo speak to you.
Okay.
Okay, so
I'm going to do so now. We got to find a way to have less of a delay here. I mean, it's one thing a Skype delay, but this is crazy. Okay, so
We did it once with
the
Skype.
hurry
It was better.
is.
It's because she's trying to stay with the stream.
That's cool. It's all good. So there's not a hurry, in a sense, but if we are going to be closing or rebuilding or doing any of these things, we need years in advance to make those decisions, at least 2 years for the school communities to make the decision relative to closure and relocation. Then we need, and if we're going to, let's say, if that decision's going to happen, if we're going to be doing that in 2020, 2 years before that's 2018. So we got to make that decision, let's say, by the end of June in 2018. And then also, so you've got that piece happening if there is a closure. Then you've also got to plan for your 2021 bond. So you've got to go to CRC and start planning for that bond at the facilities master planning in maybe 2020, end of 2019, which is what I know you're super familiar with. But all of these decisions we make now are just going to domino with everything that has to happen then, so that if we end up rebuilding a new school, that sucker's open in 2022 and ready to go. And I know it seems really far off, but it's not.
Well, you wanted June, and they've moved it up to February, so does that help?
Well, that February for the,
Yeah, we have to have input.
it's all good.
Maureen? Ask her how she's going to vote, so we hear her.
Maureen, are you there?
I think what she's doing, she's not listening to this, she's going on the streaming.
Cell phone and say, okay, let's roll.
She is on her cell. But she's has the volume
She's doing
off, and
both.
she's doing that, she's doing live streaming. And there's a
See,
delay.
what Linda finally did was she turned off the live stream.
Turn off the live streaming and just listen to the
Yeah.
meeting.
I hear you.
We would like you to vote first. So we get your vote on record. Is that legal? I seconded.
Okay, so are you waiting for me to vote first?
Yes, I am.
I vote yes, that we go ahead and
Okay.
direct the superintendent.
Okay. All in favor, vote aye?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, you got it? All right. Okay, moving on to presentation, discussion, and possible action recommendation to relocate alternative schools to Capshaw site.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. As we continue to look at our facilities and program needs, we brought this to you last year regarding our alternative programs. We have 3 that are co-located for this school year with reduced capacity because of the co-location. So Ms. Wagner is going to make a brief presentation and a recommendation.
Give me the remote, okay? Board President.
I'm sorry.
Board Member Carrillo?
I'm not understanding, okay, I know that we all went through this in board review, so I'm not understanding the need for a presentation, and I was just going to make a motion.
Up to you.
But I don't know that the public knows what happened. in board
Yeah, for the purposes
Well,
of,
we
the
would
pu- for the
talk about it.
purposes of the
Okay.
public,
This
I'd
is
like to do this
a very,
presentation.
very
It's short.
brief presentation. Go ahead. It's
Board
just
Pre-
an explanation. It's not a full-blown presentation.
Board President Price, board members, Superintendent Garcia. We have 2 slides sharing with you the considerations that you might take in action around relocation of alternative schools to the Capshaw site, the former Capshaw site. Our alternative needs programs, our alternative programs, as Dr. Garcia mentioned, 3 of them are coexisting, Bridge, Academy, and Engage. They've been in various locations throughout their time. They've been in individual buildings and co-located. They've been in city buildings. They've moved quite a bit. But they moved into a merged rental property this fall. The expansion of the programs is limited at the current location.
And I want to clarify, it's not even expansion. It's, we have reduced capacity.
Reduced capacity is
And we're-
actually a better, yeah.
And we're paying rent.
Right. So basically, all of the programs had to reduce their enrollment. And if we wanted to expand in any way or rethink how we're delivering these alternative programs, the current site doesn't allow for that whatsoever. And the lease, in fact, with Yellow Brick Properties on the lease location is up in July 2020. Okay? And so why might you consider the Capshaw site for the relocation of these 3 alternative programs? It does become available the summer of 2019. It's centrally located. It has a pond infrastructure. That's important because these programs rely heavily on computer-based programs, online-based learning, blended learning models that require them to have good internet access and infrastructure.
And we did look at various city properties this last spring to try to find an alternative site. We could never get the proper internet access to do it.
And then there's obviously ample space at the former Capshaw school for middle to high school course offerings in various methods of delivery. The blended learning could continue, but there's also ample opportunity for PE and electives. There's labs. There's just more opportunity for these alternative programs. That concludes the information that we're providing from staff, and I guess if there are any questions, Board President Price, I can entertain those or answer those.
Thank you. Do you want us to take action on this? Okay. Yes, Board Member Carrillo.
Assuming, of course, the staff recommendation is to do this, yes. So I'd like to make a motion to accept staff recommendation and to relocate our alternative schools to the Capshaw site when it becomes available.
Maureen?
Next time we should just put her on the cell and put the cell right there.
Well,
so
she
you don't
can.
She has her cell
She
phone.
can listen, she's just choosing to
She's
go.
doing both, and that's mind-boggling. Because I remember the time Linda tried to do that, and so what she did was she just stopped streaming. She just listened on her phone. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? It carries. All right, action item, district support for student regional and national competitions, board policy renumber from 347 to 423.
That is just a technical fix.
Right.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 It passes. So now we're up to board discussion and possible action. There's nothing. And advanced planning, is there anything new for advanced planning? Any changes?
You can raise your hand now. So, I have a question.
It has to be, if it's about board discussion, there's nothing on board discussion, so we can't discuss it.
Right, can I put it on for next agenda?
Yes.
So I would actually like to see, where are we at with our current bond that we have, and what projects have we spent money on? What projects
For
are
the
next?
GEO bond?
Right, for the GEO bond that was passed. Just a brief.
So you put that on the,
Yes, so we can put it, okay, so I just want to clarify your request, because we have a meeting coming up on the 23rd. Do you want like for me to do it an update? Do you want a brief presentation, or do you want it on board discussion?
Actually, I know we passed $100 million worth of bonds, and I know we have $29 million for Milagro. So when are we?
30.
When are we going to start doing the rest of the projects? Just kind of a time frame. What's left? How
All
much
right,
money's
so
left?
we'll do a quick update.
30 million.
So that
And
won't-
climbing.
I mean, you can still talk about it, it'll be on the agenda, it just won't be on board discussion.
Okay.
All right, is there do you see any changes for the advanced planning? I don't see any. Board Member Creel? Okay. So I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
To adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we're out of here.
Basketball game. Kelly, are you kidding me? Or is it here? Yeah. Or watch it on your phone. Yeah, it's Santa Fe and Serbia. What? Do we have that option? You're giving me a look. I was. Oh, okay.
She was talking to me.
All right.
If you have Apple TV, you can actually watch it on your TV. They have a channel, Renovation. Well, you don't want to do the game. Yeah, I'm just saying. Hey, I saw you unplugged the scoreboard.
Yeah, that was me, right?
I saw you.
From my little corner seat.
What happened to the Saints?
Oh my God! Oh my God!
I almost turned off the game.
What are they, what?
Did you see the Vikings get that for 4 seconds?
Oh, yeah, no, I watched all of it, yeah.
I almost turned off the game.
That was incredible. That was, we thought it was done.
You never know. Yeah, Mary is always Hail Mary.
That's right.
That was definitely a Hail Mary.
Do you know who invented that pass?
All he had to do was,
Danny White.
Did he?
all he had to do was knock him down in bounds and it would have been over.
Over.
Ay, 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 ay.
That was so sad.
Oh, well.
It was a woman on